In 1981, a small, unremarkable factory opened its doors in the sweltering industrial zone of Perai, in the Malaysian state of Penang. Nobody outside the toy industry paid much attention. It was a modest beginning, a handful of buildings, a few hundred workers, and a single product line. But that factory, known quietly inside company walls as Mattel Malaysia SDN-BHD, would grow into something almost incomprehensible. Today, it produces 9 million toy cars every single week, 1,000 Hot Wheels cars every single minute. Walk through those factory floors and the sound alone is overwhelming. The rhythmic thunder of die-casting machines, the hiss of molten zinc alloy being pressed into the shapes of 64-scale vehicles, the conveyor belts carrying miniature cars toward a global market spanning more than 150 countries. But Malaysia was never where the story began. The story began in a garage in Los Angeles in January of 1945, with 3 people and a dream so improbable it had no right to survive. Mattel Inc., the company that would eventually employ over 31,000 people across 35 countries, generate more than $5 billion in annual revenue, and build the single most recognizable doll in human history, started with picture frames and a second-hand work table. Then something went catastrophically wrong. Then something went brilliantly right. Then something went catastrophically wrong again. And throughout it all, the factories told the real story. Not the boardrooms, not the advertisements, the factories. So how does a small Los Angeles garage operation become the world's second largest toy company? How does a company survive financial scandals, catastrophic product recalls, factory closures across 3 continents, and a $1 billion acquisition that nearly broke it entirely? The answer is equal parts brilliance, stubbornness, and ruthless reinvention. This is the rise of the Mattel manufacturing empire, from a single garage to a global network of plants that never stop running. Welcome to the story of the factory floor, where childhood itself was built, dismantled, and rebuilt, generation after generation. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Stories like this one only happen when people like you keep tuning in, and we have an extraordinary one ahead of you today. January 20, 1945, Los Angeles, California. The address was nothing special, a rented garage workshop on the fringes of the city, the kind of place that collected sawdust and pipe dreams in equal measure. 3 people gathered there, with a plan modest enough to be laughable in retrospect. Harold Matt Matson, a businessman with a knack for product sales, had joined forces with a husband and wife duo named Elliot and Ruth Handler. Together they called their new venture Mattel Creations, a name deliberately stitched together from parts of Matson's surname and Elliot's first name. Matt plus L. Simple, permanent, unexpectedly durable. Elliot Handler was a designer by temperament, the kind of man who could look at a scrap of wood and see a product waiting to be born. He had previously run a successful giftware business with Ruth, and that experience gave the couple a feel for the market, what people would pick up, what they would pay for, what they would carry home. In those early months, Mattel Creations built and sold picture frames. When leftover frame pieces accumulated, Elliot began fashioning them into small dollhouse furniture. It was practical recycling, nothing more. But it turned a modest profit, and that was enough. Within a year, however, Harold Matson's health began to deteriorate. Suffering from an unnamed illness that made continued work impossible, Matson sold his share of the company to the Handlers. Ruth took over his stake. The workforce was now, in every meaningful sense, a family operation run from a workshop that most people would have dismissed as a temporary arrangement. They were not temporary people. By 1947, Mattel had produced its first genuine hit product. It was not a doll, it was not a car, it was a child-sized plastic ukulele called the Yukadoodle, designed to put a musical instrument in the hands of any child who wanted one. Parents bought it, children played it. The orders were modest but consistent, and for a company still operating out of a converted garage, consistent was everything. The following year, in 1948, Mattel was formally incorporated in Hawthorne, California, a small city in the southwestern portion of Los Angeles County. The garage was left behind. Brick walls and a proper address replaced sawdust floors and improvised shelving. But here's the thing. The real transformation had not yet begun. The factory that would define Mattel's first era of dominance was still years away, and the product that would make all of it possible had not yet been conceived. The handlers were just getting started, and they were about to make a decision that would change the toy industry forever. 1955, Burbank, California. Television was still young. Most American companies treated it with caution, preferring the reliable reach of radio and print advertising to the unpredictable new medium flashing across living room screens from coast to coast. Mattel's leadership looked at television and saw something entirely different. They saw a direct line into the homes of every child in America. In 1955, Mattel took a risk so enormous it nearly consumed the company before it paid off. They agreed to sponsor a 15-minute segment of Walt Disney's newly launched Mickey Mouse Club television series on ABC. The cost was $500,000, a staggering commitment for a company of Mattel's size, spread across a full 52-week run. This was not a test buy. This was everything. This was the company betting that a weekly promise to children watching Mickey Mouse on their parents' television sets would translate into actual toy sales. It worked. Within months, Mattel's name had penetrated American households that had never heard of the Hawthorne, California company. The Mickey Mouse Club deal did not simply sell toys. It repositioned Mattel as a fixture of American childhood, a name associated with fun, with Disney, with the cultural machinery of post-war optimism that was making middle-class American families feel, for the first time in a generation, that the future was bright and the shelves could always be restocked. But it was the year 1959 that transformed everything permanently. Ruth Handler had been watching her daughter Barbara play with paper dolls for years, assigning them adult roles, imagining adult lives. Most toy dolls in those years were baby dolls, representations of infants. Ruth saw something the rest of the industry had missed entirely. Children wanted to project forward, not backward. They wanted to imagine who they might become, not care for who they had been. On a trip to Switzerland in 1956, Ruth had come across a German toy called the Build Lily doll, an adult-figured novelty aimed primarily at adults. She bought 3. She brought 2 of them back to Mattel. And on March 9, 1959, the Barbie doll made its public debut at the New York Toy Fair. The reception was skeptical at first, but the public response was not. Children wanted Barbie. Parents bought Barbie. The factories in Hawthorne that had been building music boxes and ukuleles began retooling for something far more ambitious. The empire had found its foundation, and the factories would never be the same. 1960, Hawthorne, California. In the months following Barbie's arrival on store shelves, a new pressure settled over Mattel's manufacturing operations. Demand was not polite. It was relentless. The Hawthorne facilities that had served the company through its ukulele years and its music box experiments were suddenly tasked with producing a product that required plastic injection molding at scale, precise dimensional tolerances, and fashion accessories assembled with a level of detail that no previous Mattel product had demanded. The company went public in 1960. 3 years later, its shares appeared on the New York Stock Exchange. Capital flowed in. That capital was immediately redirected toward manufacturing capacity. By the early 1960s, Mattel's revenues had crossed $100 million for the first time. The Hawthorne plant expanded. Workers multiplied. Production lines that had once turned out a few hundred toys per shift began producing thousands per day. In 1960, Mattel introduced the Chatty Cathy doll, a talking toy voiced by actress June Foray that used a pull-string mechanism to deliver 11 phrases. It was the first mass-produced talking doll in history, and its arrival on store shelves triggered a wave of imitation that flooded the market for the next decade. The factory machinery required to produce Chatty Cathy was fundamentally different from anything Mattel had built before. Injection molds, voice mechanisms, and coordinated assembly demanded a manufacturing sophistication the company had to acquire, and acquire quickly. By 1961, Ken, Barbie's male companion, had joined the product line. By 1962, the first Barbie Dreamhouse appeared on shelves, constructed of cardboard and paper, but selling with enough momentum to prove that the accessories business surrounding Barbie was potentially as large as the doll herself. Then, in 1968, came the product that would eventually anchor Mattel's second great manufacturing empire. A team that included automotive designer Harry Paulson and a rocket scientist named Howard Newman had spent months developing a line of miniature die-cast toy cars, engineered with a precision that no toy car had achieved before. They rode on low-friction axles and flew down specially designed track sets with a speed that astonished children and adults alike. They were called Hot Wheels. The original 16 models, known to collectors today as the Sweet 16, debuted in 1968. Within a year, Hot Wheels had outsold the Barbie line. The Hawthorne plant could barely keep up. Something had to give. 1969, Hawthorne, California. The late 1960s were an extraordinary period for Mattel's manufacturing operations. The company had outgrown the garage mythology of its founding and settled into the industrial rhythm of a genuine, large-scale manufacturer. The Hawthorne facility, anchored on Rosecrans Avenue, had become a sprawling production campus where thousands of workers arrived each day to build the products that defined American childhood. Not just Barbie, not just Hot Wheels, the entire ecosystem, the Dreamhouse, the track sets, the Chatty Cathy successors, the See and Say talking educational toys introduced in 1965. In 1969, Mattel formally retired the Mattel Creations and Mattel Inc. toy makers brand distinctions, adopting the simple, unified name of Mattel. A new logo, the bold red sun design, appeared on packaging shipped from the Hawthorne plant to toy stores across the country and around the world. The company had presence not just in the United States, but in international markets that were consuming American toys with an appetite that surprised even Mattel's own executives. In 1970, Hot Wheels forged a sponsorship agreement with drag racing legends Don, the Snake, Prudhomme, and Tom, the Mongoose, McEwen. Their cars, a yellow Barracuda and a red Duster, were reproduced as die-cast Hot Wheels models and sold through the same retail network that moved Barbie accessories. The crossover between automotive culture and toy culture was deliberate and commercially devastating to every competitor in the market. Meanwhile, Mattel's international ambitions were growing. The company had begun acquiring other businesses, game companies, entertainment properties, media assets, and with each acquisition came new manufacturing considerations, new product lines, and new supply chain complexities. By the early 1970s, Mattel employed thousands of workers across its California facilities. The Hawthorne plant hummed around the clock during peak seasons. The Barbie line alone generated revenues that dwarfed what the company had earned in its first decade of combined operations. And Mattel's executives believed, with some justification, that the momentum was essentially permanent. They were wrong. But here's the thing. The cracks in the foundation were invisible from the outside, and the people who could see them refused to say so. The collapse, when it came, would be as spectacular as the rise. If you're finding this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these deep dives into history. We're just getting to the part where everything starts to unravel. Don't go anywhere. 1972. Hawthorne, California. The early 1970s arrived at Mattel like a slow-moving storm. A fire destroyed the company's manufacturing plant in Mexico. A shipyard workers' strike in Asia disrupted the supply chains that moved raw materials and finished goods between continents. Consumer confidence in post-war prosperity had begun to stagger under the weight of the oil shock, rising inflation, and a broader cultural unease that no amount of Barbie advertising could fully paper over. Mattel's sales figures, which had climbed so reliably through the late 1960s, began to stall. And in the executive offices of the Hawthorne headquarters, a decision was made that would eventually destroy the founding generation of the company's leadership. Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer Seymour Rosenberg began falsifying the company's financial reports. Not subtly, not in small ways. For 2 consecutive years in the early 1970s, Mattel issued financial statements that bore only a passing relationship to the company's actual performance. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission eventually launched an investigation that the company could not survive intact. Ruth Handler, who had designed Barbie, who had pushed the company through its garage years, who had stared down every skeptic at the 1959 New York Toy Fair, was implicated in the scandal. Both she and Seymour Rosenberg pleaded no contest to federal charges. They were fined. They were ordered to perform 500 hours of community service annually for 5 years, in lieu of prison sentences, and they were forced out of the company they had founded. Ruth Handler sold her remaining Mattel stock in 1980, ending a 35-year connection to the enterprise she had built from a pile of wood scraps and picture frame offcuts. Elliot Handler, the designer whose hands had made the first dollhouse furniture in that Los Angeles garage, departed alongside her. Into the vacuum stepped Arthur S. Spear, then a Mattel vice president, who assumed control of the company in 1975. Within 2 years, under his leadership, Mattel had returned to profitability. The factories kept running, the products kept shipping, but the soul of the founding era was gone. The plant on Rosecrans Avenue did not close, but something essential had changed in the rooms above it. A new Mattel was about to be built, by people who had not been there for the beginning. 1977, Hawthorne, California. The company that Arthur Spear steadied in the late 1970s was not the same company that Ruth Handler had led into the New York Stock Exchange. It was leaner, more cautious, and acutely aware of how quickly a profitable business could become a liability. But cautious companies can still make catastrophically bold errors, and Mattel was about to make one of the most expensive mistakes in the history of American toy manufacturing. In 1977, Mattel debuted its first electronic product, a handheld electronic game. The timing was not accidental. The broader consumer electronics market was electrifying in a way that had not been seen since television, and Mattel's leadership believed that a toy company of their size should own a piece of that transformation. The handheld game sold well enough to be encouraging. By 1979, Mattel Electronics had launched the Intellivision, a home video game console designed to compete directly with the Atari 2600, then the dominant force in home gaming. The Intellivision was technically sophisticated, and Mattel promoted it aggressively, promising that a keyboard component would eventually transform the console into a fully functional home computer. The factories and assembly operations required to support the electronics division were added to Mattel's already complex manufacturing footprint. What followed was a controlled disaster. The keyboard component proved too expensive to mass produce. The broader video game market, which had been expanding at a pace that seemed supernatural, collapsed entirely in 1983, the great video game crash that wiped out an industry virtually overnight. Mattel Electronics absorbed losses that the rest of the company could barely absorb alongside. In 1983 alone, Mattel Electronics generated a loss of $394 million. The company came within a signature of bankruptcy. New York-based venture capital firms E.M. Warburg, Pincus & Company, and Drexel Burnham Lambert invested hundreds of millions of dollars in 1984 to keep the company alive. The electronics division was eventually shut down and incorporated out of existence. The manufacturing capacity dedicated to it was dismantled. Meanwhile, John W. Ammerman, who had joined Mattel in 1980 to run its international division, was watching all of this carefully. He had seen what happened when a company chased trends instead of protecting the assets it already owned. He was about to have the chance to prove his theory correct. 1987, El Segundo, California. When John W. Ammerman was named chairman of Mattel in 1987, the company he inherited was technically solvent, but spiritually uncertain. The electronics catastrophe had drained hundreds of millions of dollars. The founding generation had departed under the shadow of a federal investigation, and Barbie, once the unstoppable engine of Mattel's manufacturing empire, had been neglected in favor of distractions that had proven disastrous. Ammerman moved with the kind of decisive clarity that suffering organizations sometimes produce in their leaders. He closed 40% of Mattel's existing manufacturing capacity, plants in California, Taiwan, and the Philippines that were aging, expensive, and redundant. He eliminated 150 corporate positions at the California headquarters, saving an estimated $30 million annually. He restructured debt. He cut advertising budgets in the short term to rebuild margins. And then he did the thing that mattered most. He went back to Barbie. Under Ammerman's direction, the Barbie line was rebuilt into a cultural juggernaut. The doll was expanded from a core product into an ecosystem. Approximately 50 different Barbie dolls per year, supported by 250 accessory items ranging from shoes and furniture to a full cosmetics line. In 1985, Mattel had launched the "We Girls Can Do Anything" television advertising campaign, which planted the idea of Barbie not as a passive decoration, but as a vessel for ambition. The campaign resonated across the country. In 1988, Ammerman negotiated a landmark licensing agreement with the Walt Disney Company, giving Mattel the rights to produce infant and preschool plush toys based on Disney characters and to sell products at Disney's theme parks. The relationship between the two companies, which dated back to the original Mickey Mouse Club sponsorship of 1955, was reborn as a revenue-generating alliance. Between 1987 and 1992, Barbie sales climbed from $430 million to nearly $1 billion annually. That growth accounted for roughly half of Mattel's total revenue of $1.85 billion. The Hawthorne plant that had survived the electronics disaster was running at near full capacity. Then, Ammerman made a decision that would reshape Mattel's manufacturing geography permanently. In 1990, the company moved its headquarters from Hawthorne to a new campus in El Segundo, California. The old address, the one that had housed the transformation of a garage company into an industrial giant, was left behind. A new chapter had already begun on the other side of the world. October 8, 1992. Cikarang, West Java, Indonesia. The Jababeka Industrial Park sits east of Jakarta in a landscape that had been agricultural land not many years earlier. In the early 1990s, it was becoming one of the most densely built industrial zones in Southeast Asia. Rows of factories, warehouses, and processing facilities stretching out in every direction from the main access roads. On October 8, 1992, Mattel inaugurated its first Indonesian production facility here. They called it the West Plant. The factory was built on 45,000 square meters of land. Its initial mandate was the production of Barbie dolls for the global market, the same product that had rebuilt Mattel's finances under Ammerman, now being manufactured on the other side of the world in a plant where labor costs were dramatically lower than anything the company had sustained in California or Taiwan. The math was inescapable. The quality of the product did not diminish. The profit margins increased substantially, and Mattel was not alone in making this calculation. The entire American toy industry was moving east. By 1997, Mattel opened a second Indonesian facility in Cikarang, the East Plant, which over time became the primary global factory for Barbie doll production. Together, the two Indonesian plants would eventually employ nearly 9,000 workers during peak production seasons, which typically ran from April through May and again from September through October as the holiday retail cycle demanded. Meanwhile, in 1991, an 11-year-old factory in the Malaysian state of Penang was quietly becoming one of the most important toy manufacturing sites on Earth. Mattel Malaysia SDN BHD had opened in Perai in 1981 with a mandate to produce Hot Wheels. By the early 1990s, it had grown into the exclusive global manufacturer of Hot Wheels single-pack cars, the iconic blister-packaged vehicles that lined the pegs of every toy aisle in America. The Indonesian and Malaysian plants were not anomalies. They were the new center of gravity. American manufacturing, the Hawthorne plants, the Fisher-Price factories in upstate New York, the California assembly lines that had produced the Sweet 16 Hot Wheels in 1968, was being systematically phased out. Not all at once, but inexorably. The problem was growing faster than anyone admitted. 1993. El Segundo, California. Mattel entered the 1990s in the strongest financial position it had occupied since the early 1970s. Barbie's revenue recovery was real and substantial. The international manufacturing network in Asia was producing at scale and at margins that the old California plants could never have matched. And John Ammerman, surveying the landscape, believed that the moment had come to grow through acquisition rather than organic product development alone. On August 20th, 1993, Mattel completed the purchase of Fisher-Price Inc. for $1 billion. Founded in 1930 in East Aurora, New York, by Herman Fisher, Irving Price, Helen Shelley, and Margaret Evans Price, Fisher-Price had spent 6 decades building a dominant position in the infant and preschool toy market. Its Little People line, its Chatter telephone, its Rocker Stack stacking toy, these were the products American parents bought before their children were old enough for Barbie or Hot Wheels. The acquisition made Mattel the largest toy company in the world. Fisher-Price brought with it a manufacturing infrastructure centered in western New York, factories in East Aurora, in Medina, in Holland. These plants employed thousands of workers who had spent careers building American-made toys for American children. The ink was barely dry on the merger agreement before Mattel's management began the painful calculus of which facilities were worth keeping. In 1997, Mattel acquired Tyco Toys, owner of the Matchbox and Dinky Toys brands, expanding its die-cast vehicle portfolio to encompass multiple product lines across multiple price points. In 1998, it purchased Pleasant Company, maker of the American Girl brand. That same year, it acquired Bluebird Toys of Swindon, England, bringing Polly Pocket into the portfolio. In 1999, Mattel made the most consequential and catastrophic purchase of its modern era. It paid $3.5 billion for the Learning Company, an educational software business that produced products for a market Mattel understood imperfectly. The integration failed almost immediately. The following year, Mattel sold the Learning Company at a staggering loss, recording a $430 million net loss for the year 2000. The Learning Company disaster did not break Mattel, but it wounded it badly. And at the very moment the company was absorbing those losses, its manufacturing decisions were about to generate a crisis of a different kind entirely. We're halfway through this incredible story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything to us. The story is about to take a turn that nearly destroyed the trust of every parent who had ever bought a Mattel toy. 2002. East Aurora, New York. In 2002, Mattel closed the last factory it operated on American soil, the Fisher-Price manufacturing facility in Kentucky, which had employed 980 workers and produced Fisher-Price products that accounted for less than 10% of Mattel's total global output, shut its doors as part of a long-running consolidation effort aimed at moving all North American production to a single location. The closure was the final chapter of a decades-long process. The East Aurora factory in New York, built in 1951 on Girard Avenue, and once the home of iconic Fisher-Price products like the Bubble Mower and the Little People playsets, had already been shuttered years earlier, eliminating 450 jobs when it closed. The Medina plant, parts of which dated to 1899, had been idled as production migrated to cheaper facilities in Mexico, China, and Asia. Fisher-Price's total worldwide payroll had been cut by more than half during the 1990s, with 7 factories closed and nearly 2,000 workers displaced from Western New York alone. By 2002, China manufactured approximately 65% of Mattel's global toy output. The economic logic was sound. The oversight logic was not. In July of 2007, a European retailer conducting routine quality testing discovered something deeply wrong with a batch of Mattel toys produced at a Chinese contract manufacturing facility. Lead levels in the surface paint reached 10,000 parts per million, against a United States legal limit at the time of 600 parts per million. What followed was one of the most damaging product safety crises in the history of American consumer goods. On August 14, 2007, Mattel recalled over 18 million products. The recall included more than 7 million Polly Pocket toys, 600,000 Barbie and Tanner playsets, and 1 million doggy daycare sets. The company's head of worldwide operations, Thomas Dabrowski, publicly acknowledged that the majority of the recalled products reflected design flaws originating in Mattel's own processes, not just the fault of Chinese manufacturers. It was a rare moment of corporate honesty in the middle of a global scandal. In June of 2009, Mattel and Fisher-Price agreed to pay a $2.3 million civil penalty to the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission, the largest fine of its kind at the time. A separate settlement with 39 state attorneys general cost an additional $12 million. The factories in China were audited, procedures were rewritten, but the damage to consumer trust was not easily audited away. December 6, 2022. Perai, Penang, Malaysia. On a warm Malaysian afternoon, Mattel executives gathered at the Perai Industrial Zone to celebrate a milestone that would have been unimaginable to the company's founders. Mattel Malaysia SDN BHD, the factory that had opened 41 years earlier as a modest Hot Wheels production facility, had grown into something without precedent in the global toy industry. The plant covered 13 acres. It employed nearly 3,900 workers on a permanent basis, and it was producing, at the moment of its anniversary celebration, approximately 9 million Hot Wheels cars every single week, 1,000 cars per minute, 440 million cars per year. Every single one of them, the single-pack vehicles that line toy store pegs from Tokyo to Tulsa, manufactured exclusively at this one facility in a state known for its seafood and its colonial-era shophouses. Mattel's Senior Vice President for Global Manufacturing and Asia Operations, Su Tek Heng, stood before the assembled press and local dignitaries and announced that the plant was expanding. 2 new buildings were under construction adjacent to the existing facility. When complete, the expansion would push annual production past 500 million Hot Wheels cars, a 20% increase in capacity. The Malaysian plant was not simply the world's largest Hot Wheels factory, it was the world's only manufacturer of Hot Wheels single-pack cars. Every die-cast vehicle in a blister pack on every toy shelf in the world came from this facility in Penang. The achievement was both staggering in scale and deeply symbolic of how completely Mattel's manufacturing geography had shifted from its California origins. A second Malaysian facility, Mattel Development and Tooling SDN BHD, established in 1985, operated as a state-of-the-art center for product development, digital model making, and mold design. The engineering backbone that translated the design work done at Mattel's El Segundo headquarters into production-ready tooling for factories around the world. To mark the occasion, Mattel announced a licensing partnership with Proton, Malaysia's national automotive brand, to produce a 1/64th scale model of the original Proton Saga as part of the Hot Wheels singles collection. The factory floor never stopped. It wouldn't slow for the ceremony. It never slowed for anything. March 15th, 2022. Nuevo León, Mexico. While Malaysia was setting production records on the eastern side of the world, Mattel was simultaneously executing a historic reshaping of its Western manufacturing operations. In Nuevo León, Mexico, a northern state with a capital city approximately 2 hours from the United States border, the company had been quietly building something remarkable inside the Montoy S.A. de CV facility. Between 2020 and 2022, Mattel invested more than 1 billion Mexican pesos, the equivalent of approximately 47 million United States dollars, in the Montoy plant. The investment consolidated manufacturing operations previously spread across facilities in Tijuana, Mexico, and Montreal, Canada, bringing them under one roof in a facility that would become the largest Mattel plant in the world by physical size. At 200,000 square meters, the equivalent of over 2 million square feet, the Montoy facility dwarfed any single Mattel production site that had come before it. The plant manufactured the Barbie Dreamhouse, Fisher-Price Power Wheels, and Mega Bloks. Its workforce had grown from 1,600 employees in 2019 to 3,500 in 2022. Finished goods from the Montoy facility were exported to nearly 30 countries. Mattel's chief executive officer, Ynon Kreiz, who had taken the position in April of 2018 after a period of corporate turbulence that had included a failed takeover approach by rival Hasbro, stood at the inauguration ceremony alongside the economy secretary of Nuevo León and spoke about the strategic logic of nearshoring. The COVID-19 pandemic had exposed the vulnerabilities of supply chains built entirely around Asian manufacturing hubs. Months of port congestion, shipping container shortages, and factory closures had forced a reckoning across every industry that depended on goods produced thousands of miles from their final markets. Mattel's answer was Montoy, an investment in proximity, an investment in the Americas. The Nuevo León plant was also designed from inception to become an Industry 4.0 facility, one that connected workers, machines, and production processes through digital systems designed to reduce waste, eliminate downtime, and maximize output in a way that the Hawthorne plant of 1965 could not have imagined. The company that had once manufactured all its toys within driving distance of the Los Angeles basin now operated its largest plant within driving distance of the Rio Grande. July 21, 2023. Global. The factory in Chikarang had never stopped. The one in Penang had never stopped. The one in Nuevo León had never stopped. And on July 21, 2023, the opening weekend of the live-action Barbie film, directed by Greta Gerwig and starring Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling, the whole world was reminded, all at once, why those factories existed. The film grossed $1 billion at the global box office within 17 days of its release, making Gerwig the first solo female director to achieve that milestone. But for Mattel's manufacturing operations, the film's impact was even more immediate than box office receipts suggested. Barbie-branded merchandise had been flooding retail shelves for months before the release. Over 120 product lines created in partnership with Miniso, the Chinese lifestyle retailer that had acquired a stake in Mattel's stock as part of the collaboration. The Barbie Dreamhouse was selling at a pace that strained the Montoy facility's capacity. The Indonesian East plant, the world's largest single producer of Barbie dolls, was running at maximum output. At PT Mattel Indonesia's Cikarang facility, which celebrated its 30th anniversary in 2022, alongside the inauguration of a new molding center, the numbers told the story in their plainest form. The Indonesian plants employed nearly 9,000 workers during peak season. They produced more Barbie dolls than any other manufacturing site on Earth. Their output represented more than 35% of Indonesia's total global toy exports. Yet, even amid this extraordinary commercial moment, Mattel's manufacturing operation faced new pressures. The United States government's evolving tariff policies toward China, where Mattel still sourced a significant percentage of its production, had prompted the company to commit publicly to reducing its reliance on Chinese factories to less than 40% of total output by 2025. 500 individual product lines, known internally as stock-keeping units, had already been relocated out of China. Meanwhile, in February 2026, Mattel announced the acquisition of its mobile gaming joint venture partner, Mattel 163, from the Chinese internet company NetEase for $159 million. The transaction, which transferred full ownership of the game development studio to Mattel, reflected the company's accelerating transformation from a physical toy manufacturer into an intellectual property enterprise. But the factories kept running. They always kept running. Return to the plant in Parai, Penang, on any ordinary workday in 2026. The machines do not stop for visitors. They do not slow for anniversaries or press conferences or corporate milestones. 1,000 Hot Wheels cars emerge every 60 seconds from the die casting presses and move along the conveyor belts toward packaging, toward shipping, toward the hands of children in 150 countries who will never know the name of the town where their toy was made. If you stand near the production floor long enough, the sound becomes its own kind of music, mechanical, relentless, strangely beautiful. The building in Los Angeles, where all of this began, is long gone. The garage where Harold Matson and Ruth and Elliot Handler assembled their first picture frames and dollhouse furniture has been consumed by the ordinary renewal of a city that never stops remaking itself. The Hawthorne headquarters on Rosecrans Avenue is a memory now, the subject of occasional social media posts by people who remember what it looked like. The factory in East Aurora, New York, where Fisher-Price built the Little People sets and bubble mowers that defined a generation of American childhood, has been repurposed. The machines are elsewhere. What the story of Mattel's manufacturing empire teaches, ultimately, is this. The companies that endure are not the ones that protect what they have. They are the ones that understand when what they have is no longer enough. Mattel survived the accounting scandal of the early 1970s because new leadership rebuilt the financial foundation without abandoning the product legacy. It survived the video game disaster of 1983 because John Ammerman recognized that chasing trends at the expense of core brands is a form of self-destruction. It survived the lead paint crisis of 2007 because the company's response was honest and immediate, even when honesty was uncomfortable. The second lesson is geographic. Manufacturing follows economics, and economics follows labor costs, infrastructure, and logistics, not sentiment. The Hawthorne workers who assembled the first Hot Wheels could not compete indefinitely with the tooling engineers in Penang or the assembly workers in Cikarang. That is not a failure of any individual. It is the architecture of global commerce, and the companies that understand it early survive. The ones that fight it too long do not. The third lesson is simpler than either of the others. A brand is a promise, and a factory is where that promise is kept. Every Hot Wheels car stamped "Made in Malaysia" is the fulfillment of a commitment made in a Los Angeles garage in January of 1945. From 1945 to 2026, 81 years. From a single garage to factories on 4 continents. From a ukulele called the Yuka-Doodle to a global intellectual property empire generating $5.35 billion in annual revenue. From 9 people in Hawthorne to 31,000 employees worldwide. The machines in Penang will not stop tonight. They will not stop tomorrow. They never stop.